All right, everybody, hello and welcome. As always, I am Shaun. This is the reserve team, and our season preview series continues. We continue our way down the ladder, down to Perth Glory. Of course, they did do quite well, I think, a couple of seasons ago in the A-League itself. They're maybe at the precipice of, their championship window, but we're going to talk through that today. Thankfully, I'm not on my own, though. I've got two experts on hand to talk through all things Perth and all things purple in today's episode. First up, making his debut on the channel, he's been with us for a little while, but we haven't seen his face just yet, is Will Dowdy. Will, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, all good. Not sure about expert, but anyway.
Mate, if we can call me a host, we can call you an expert. That's absolutely fine. So these are loose terms. No one's going to take us to court or anything on it. And then, of course, joining us as well from the Soccer Podcast. Fantastic to have the Soccer Podcast guys involved and collaborating on the channel. We've got Joe joining us today. Joe, thanks so much for jumping in with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm happy to make my debut, and hopefully it's a good 90 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, look, the worst thing that we could probably do is try and limit ourselves to 90 minutes. I think the last one we recorded went for like 2.5 hours, and we had to chop that back down because it was just, by the end of it, I think the worst thing is we've had such a long year in 2020 and such a weird off season that everyone's desperate to talk about football. And if anything, the toughest part is going to be trying to take our hot takes down to like 5 and 10 minutes rather than trying to find things to talk about, particularly when it comes to the Glory. But if you guys don't mind, I'm going to quickly run through a brief history of Perth Glory, and then I'm going to get some of your thoughts. I'll cut to you back in a second. But Perth Glory, for those of you that aren't aware, started in 1995. A bid led by West Australian businessman Nick Tanner was prepared for entry into the old National Soccer League. Perth Glory was subsequently handed a licence to join the 1996-1997 NSL season, and on the 1st of December 1995, the club and name was officially launched. From a relatively unheralded start, the club would develop beyond all expectations and commercially re-establish association football, soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, in a state dominated by Australian rules football in Western Australia, and a place where both rugby league and rugby union feared to tread, having both had failed franchises, I guess is the best way to put it, in that state. Eventually, the relaunched and renamed Football Federation Australia announced the creation of the A-League in 2005. The financial stability during the crazy final days of the NSL and Soccer Australia and leadership of Chairman Nick Tanner and their boardroom at that time ensured the Perth Glory had a place in the new division where they were awarded a licence they have held from foundation to today. Early struggles on the field in the A-League and off-field changes, including those board members, led to poor on-field results in the early seasons, and they did eventually start to right the ship a little bit, making finals appearance, slowly building towards their first A-League Grand Final appearance in 2012, losing to a Brisbane Roar side following a Bessart Beresha dive to win a penalty in the final minutes. We'll see if that comes out throughout the course of the evening, gents. They finished FFA Cup runners-up twice in 2015 and 2016, and they won their inaugural premiership in 2018-2019 before losing on penalties to Sydney FC in the Grand Final. More on Brenton Santalab a little bit later. What I wanted to get from both of you guys is some of your earliest or fondest memories of Perth Glory. Now, I'm not sure everybody's been supporting them all the way through from the NSL days, even in the most recent A-League seasons. Joe, as our guest, we'll go to you first. What are some of your earliest or fondest memories of the Glory themselves?
Probably my earliest one is because I would have been like a member of thanks to my parents during the late NSL years. I think the last year, and I remember going to the Wollongong final at the old Subiaco Oval, and I remember not knowing it was a grand final. I just remember seeing all these people here not knowing what the occasion was. Then it wasn't until years later that was the NSL Grand Final that Glory were up 3-0. Then ends up losing on penalties after conceding 3 goals in the second half. So that's probably my earliest memory.
Yeah, I mean, you must have thought every fixture throughout the NSL era had 50,000 people filling out Subiaco Oval at that particular time. It's
especially in Perth as well, yeah.
Yeah, especially in Perth. Some of the footage from that day is absolutely crazy. That was a proper sea of purple and a sea of flags, and it's never easy to create that intimidating an atmosphere in oval stadiums. We've talked to death on this channel about our hatred of oval stadia for football at the moment. But yeah, some fantastic memories from way back in the day. And, I think benefit of hindsight, you can look back now and say you were there right back at the start and right there for the start of the A-League era as well. Will, obviously a little bit younger, probably more recent history for yourself with Perth Glory, but what are some of your earliest or fondest memories with the team?
Yeah, well, I definitely haven't been here for as long as Joe. My earliest memory, I think, was 2015-16 season, because I'm not really from a football family. So my first game was I got invited by some mates. I think it was Brisbane, and we drew 2-2. But I remember I just absolutely loved the active support and stuff. I remember Jamie McLaren was playing and I booed him. I didn't know who he was. And yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I'm sure that probably resonated with him quite a bit on his triumphant return to Perth Glory. But, he went on to bigger and better things now at my club, but I've got to squash that bias, all right? We're talking about Perth today. We're not talking about Melbourne City. The last 5 finishes in the last A-League season results. In 2015, 2016, likely the first time that you went across, Will, 5th place in the league and an elimination final defeat. 2016, 2017, 5th place in the league and a semi-final defeat. In 2017, 2018, an 8th place finish in the league. It's the first time in the last 7 years that they actually missed finals that particular season. 2018, 2019, premiers in the league led by Tony Popovich and runners-up, as we've already mentioned, in the grand final defeat to Sydney FC. And then last season, 6th place in the league and a semi-final exit to Sydney FC 2-0 after we came out of that lockdown bubble in that Sydney environment, which was a tough place for a lot of, I think, the interstate teams. Well, I want to get your season highlights from both of you guys from last year. Obviously, the 19-20 season felt like it went for about 2.5 years, given that we had different lockdown breaks, given different restrictions with travel, all that sort of stuff before we eventually got it finished. Will, do you have anything from last season that you think is a particular highlight or something that you want to see further this year?
Well, I think that 7 match, I think it was, when we had 7 wins in a row, and that was after we were bottom of the table after that Melbourne Victory loss. And yeah, I remember when we beat Melbourne City to start that run, that was really crazy because we all thought it was against one of the top teams. We thought we were getting smashed and it was going back to the old days of being one of the worst teams in the A-League. But then, yeah, we went back on that 7-match run, got us back in the finals, and that was really good.
Every time I've travelled to NIB for a City away game, and I did briefly live in Perth, full disclosure as well, I've watched Melbourne City or Melbourne Heart lose convincingly. So, it's not a fun place that I ever look at and think that's a guaranteed 3 points against Perth. And then every other time that we've beat you guys, I think Castro does something ridiculous, like scores a 35-yard volley into the bottom corner or something like that to eventually win the game. So I never look fondly on the Perth fixtures coming up throughout the course of a year. Same question for yourself, Joe. What were some of your season highlights from last year and things that you hopefully want to see in the upcoming season as well?
Probably my biggest highlight was against Melbourne City as well, but this was in the 3-2 home loss. I think Glory were down 3-2 at the time, so they just came back. And our centre-back, Big Greg, has just had a long shot from 40 yards out, and Tom Glover ended up saving it. But after the shot, Big Greg just turns the big stand to NIB and gives the crowd one of those ones to make some noise. And for me, that just got me right in my heart, and I think that's my moment of the season.
Yeah, it'll be tough to see Withrick not out on the park this year. He did bring quite a bit on the field and off the field. I think the fact that you both called out Melbourne City games, either you both did your research and knew that I was hosting today, or it just happens to be that we are the biggest liability in the division, and at any point we could concede a variety of goals throughout the course of the year. We don't have boring games. I would go along with that. Speaking of the stadium, you've both mentioned it. Perth Oval, currently known as HBF Stadium, formerly known as NIB, and I think QBE Insurance Stadium. Obviously, the shed is a big part of the active support. We'll talk about that further, a little bit further down the run sheet as well. But what are some of your thoughts on the stadium? How it serves Perth Glory where they're currently at, and how it serves some of the stuff we've already mentioned, rectangular sort of boutique stadiums available for our A-League sides. Joe, I'll go to you first on this one.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much perfect. It's not too big, it's not too small. When it's packed out, we can get I think it's a bit over 20,000, which for Perth Glory, it's perfect. It's rectangle. That's how low the bar is for me for a stadium. But yeah, no, I love it. There used to be old scaffolding, which made the stadium look a lot older, a lot similar to how Hindmarsh is now. But yeah, no, it's rectangle, 20,000 seats. That's the best ground for any A-League team, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? We don't need to have big 50,000 seat stadiums that are empty every week. That's something that we've complained about a variety of clubs around the division. That 20,000, that's the sweet spot. That's the ceiling for most of the crowds that we're going to get week to week. Will, I'll ask you the same question. What are some of your thoughts on the stadium? But I'll expand it a little bit further for you. You now, of course, have Optus Stadium, or whatever it's called, over in Perth, as the bigger 50,000 seat venue. What do you think that means for the future of Perth Oval as well?
Well, I remember when they were looking at building Optus Stadium, they were looking at expanding HBF Park to much bigger, but I'm quite happy that didn't end up happening. I think HBF Park it's just like Joe said, it's perfect. There's not really another choice in Perth though, not like in Sydney and Melbourne and stuff like that, where they have the NRL grounds to go to, because are obviously an AFL state, so we've only got pretty much oval stadiums. And yeah, I think HBF Park is, while it's very good, I think the rent on it is crazily high. It's like 100,000 a game, and that really drives up the ticket prices. And yeah, that's probably a reason why our attendance has been quite low in recent seasons.
Yeah, it can be a struggle as well. Like I think, so there's two things with HBF. Sorry, I nearly said NIB. But I think the first one is it would have been like the perfect venue. The way that Hindmarsh has just gotten all the funding for the 2023 Women's World Cup to be a host venue, it would have been the perfect one for Perth to have like that 20,000 seat capacity and get some of those updates. What I don't think is going to happen now is I think the West Australian federal governments have now put all that money towards Optus Stadium. It's unlikely that anything's going to get further updating, but it would have been fantastic to see. I think one of the big things for HBF that's going to help it quite a bit, like I've sat there during like a 35-degree day, I'm sure you guys have as well, the old A-League summer season rearing its head. I think it's going to be one of the best venues once we eventually make that transition to a winter season. And it's not as glary, it's not as bright, like you are pretty close to the action in all that respect. I think there's quite a few venues around the division and around the league that are really going to benefit from playing during winter, and I think HBF is potentially going to become one of the premier sort of away day experiences for everybody in and around the league. So hopefully that continues in the next few years. Moving to the kit corner, shout out to Brian Gibson. This is his little spiel for us. But you guys are now in your 7th year of a deal with Macron, which is crazy long in terms of the A-League and the history of some of our changes in kit suppliers. What are your thoughts, Will, on the kits for this season? Both seemingly well received from the Perth fan group as far as we've seen?
Yeah, the kits this season are pretty good, I'd say. The away kit, I'd say, is better than the home kit. I don't really like those little orange bits on the home kit, but I think it is definitely way better than last year's nipple cover kits. Way better than those. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, once you've got those like nipple logos, you can't really it's only up from there. There's no further down that you can fall down the tier list. What about for yourself, Joe? What are your thoughts on the Macron offerings this season?
I think it's class, like especially compared to last season with that weird like tinge of purple as well. This one just looks very silky. Like I think it has championship winners written all over it.
Yeah, look, full disclosure, I quite like them. I think I like the little bits of orange, even though you don't like it, Will. Apologies for disagreeing with you, but I think that looks a lot better and it suits the Perth Glory like logo and style and colour palette a lot better than like the silver and the grey that we've had in the last 3 or 4 seasons. It would be a phenomenal kit if it didn't have bloody BHP written in massive letters across the front of it, but you know that's personal opinion coming into it more than anything else. But I think probably the best home and away kits we've seen from Macron since they've really taken over. I think that relationship with Perth Glory, I think they're both very sharp looking and hopefully they look quite decent out on the pitch this season as well. Now we are going to jump, boys, into probably the longer discussion portions of the evening because we're going to start talking about the players in and out of the Perth Glory squad. Now, of course, across the division this year, we've seen a variety of different players leave, some of them heading overseas, some of them heading to India, Europe, Asia, wherever else. We are at a point now where the league is arguably starting to get its first real test in this post-pandemic period. How are we going to develop our squads, develop our younger players to get them ready for elite level football within Australia? First up, we're going to go through these players out, and then I'm going to get some of your thoughts on the players that have left and the key ones that you think are going to be most difficult to replace or haven't been replaced yet in the transfer window. First one, Jake Brimmer to Melbourne Victory. Alex Grant to the K-League, which is to be confirmed. He has departed the club but hasn't yet been announced at one of the K-League sides. I think Pohang Steelers are involved and a few of the other sides also. Tomislav Merchella has left. He's still unattached at time of recording. Jacob Tratt has made an interesting move to Odisha FC in the Indian Super League where he'll partner Stephen Taylor from Wellington Phoenix from last year, which is probably the least likely central defensive partnership I would have called out 12 months ago. Ivan Franic moves across to new side MacArthur FC. Joel Keenaze heads to Hyderabad FC in the Indian Super League. He left and signed about halfway through last season, but finished out the year. Wande has left and returned to Europe, still unattached. Vince Leah has moved back to Victoria and just recently signed with MPL Victoria side Altona Magic. Dino Djulbic is still unattached, but has left the club. Thomas James, a highly sought after MPL striker from a few seasons ago, returned towards the end of last year prior to the COVID break to finish the season with Wollongong Wolves. Daniel Margush, young goalkeeper, has left and gone to Western Sydney Wanderers. Tarek Elric has recently left the club and still remains unattached at the time of recording. And then everybody's favourite players, Gabriel and Christian Popovic, have made the move over to second division Greece with their dad and with Shanti, because it's cheaper to live with your parents than it is to get your own apartment in Perth at the moment. Thoughts on players out? Joe, I'll go to you first. Any of those names on the list looking at being big losses? I think there are a couple in there that are a little bit tricky. And then any others that you think might be, still really need to be replaced as far as the inbound players are concerned?
I think probably the biggest loss, like on the field and probably off the field for fans as well, was probably Alex Grant. He's been around for just about 5 years at the club, and he's everyone's like favourite centre back like for the last few years. He's been unlucky with injuries though in the last few years, but as like he's from Perth as well, so that's probably like it's like a bit hurt. Like it hurts the heart to see him leave a bit. But it's a good opportunity for him as well. But now it will test our centre back stocks, especially. But we did see in the ACL that we did have a few young players. I think Luke Bodner, who should step up and fill his shoes. He seemed quite promising in the ACL. But I don't know, one day is another big loss. I'm not sure if our midfield will be strong this season at all, like the partner Kilkenny. Otherwise, I don't know, left back, we don't have one at the moment. There are rumours regarding a Japanese fullback. But apart from that, those are probably ones like the big losses. Apart from that, like I think everyone's happy to see Elric leave. There's a lot of discussion about the Popoviches. I quite like Christian, but it's good to see Gabby go, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. Apart from that, there's a lot of opportunities for the youngsters coming up for Glory this season, and that's the only bright side, I think, from all these losses.
I think the one thing that I could say that, and again, if we had recorded this during the week or last week, we wouldn't have known about this Alex Grant thing. So it's good timing, not good timing for Perth fans, but good timing for the content. Is that over the course of the last few years, you guys have had like Shane Lowry, Alex Grant, who we've just mentioned, Matt Sporanovic, Marcella, who's just left the club, a variety of different players in that central defensive position where it's always been a real strength of Perth Glory's lineup in their stock. We will talk about the players in and some of the players that they've brought across that could potentially play in that position, as well as the contracted players as well. But it is always seeming to be like that's the key area, that they always have strength in depth and they always have really good quality available. And this might be the first year, I think, in the last 5, 6, 7 seasons where in reality that you kind of look at it and think, oh, maybe that's actually the weakest spot. As far as the central midfield is concerned, I'm a massive rat for Neil Kilkenny. I'd play just one man in midfield as long as he was that man. And I think he's only got more powerful since he's added braces to his repertoire as well. So huge raps for him from his Melbourne City days, of course. But William, same question to yourself, mate. Of those players out, who do you think really stands out at you as someone that needs to be replaced? Or potentially from the other side of the coin, any of the youngsters that have moved on that you really would have loved to see play in the Perth Glory lineup?
The youngsters, I don't think, under the Popovic era, most of them didn't really get much of a sniff, so I'm not really sure if how good they are. So I'd say the biggest loss would probably be One Day, and we haven't replaced him yet, other than I'd say Brandon Wilson, but he's definitely not a like-for-like replacement for One Day. And yeah, we will definitely miss him a lot in the next season and the seasons to come.
Yeah, I guess the one comfort that you guys can take, and we'll talk about this further a little bit with contracted players in again, is that there is still quite a bit of time till Perth Glory actually plays their first fixture. They've got an extended break, one due to lockdown restrictions going in and out of Western Australia at the moment, but then also returning from the ACL campaign. So they don't actually have a fixture until the 16th. They've still got over a month until their season kicks off, which is much longer a period than most of the clubs are getting ready for their first fixtures. There is still potential that they could bring more players in, which I guess is the tricky part of us trying to do this during pre-season. And A-League business lately in the last year or two, and I think particularly this year, is very late in the transfer window that we're seeing quite a few of these international players come in. But yeah, definitely I think Alex Grant and One Day are the biggest names that jump out on the list. I think the Thomas James one is really interesting, given that Gabriel and Christian Popovic did play quite a bit in the A-League last season and that he had big raps on him. It would be interesting to see if he heads back to the A-League at some point. And then the other one, I think Jake Brimmer. I always kind of thought he did pretty well. Never, not the best midfielder ever available, but would always kind of slot in as that third central midfielder with Kilkenny and One Day. And I thought he was a very good player. And so far, he's doing pretty well at Melbourne Victory from what we've seen from their pre-season results and their pre-season lineups as well. So he might be an interesting one to see coming through. We're going to take a break from the player out portion because we do ask each and every week a big question for our season previews, mainly to get the opinions and the perspectives of the fans like yourselves. The first one I wanted to ask you guys is, it's around the ownership group. So Tony Sage is the current owner of Perth Glory. He was initially part of a consortium that bought the Glory in 2007. There were two other businessmen from Western Australia involved with that as well. They took over from Nick Tanya. Briefly, the club was owned by the FFA in the early days of the A-League itself. He then bought the club outright in 2009. He was responsible for pretty much funding quite a bit of the club. You've mentioned already, Will, the high expense of operating a club in Perth and using the stadium facilities and all that sort of stuff. And he does deserve a tremendous amount of credit for all the work that he's done and all the work that he's put in to get Perth Glory to this point. And it, of course, deserves a tremendous amount of credit as well for your recent premiership at the same time. However, in the last 12 months, he's done some kind of weird things. He's said random stuff before about wanting Perth Glory to join like a Southeast Asian Super League, which we've heard come up a few different times from various businessmen in and around football. Never football people, always businessmen that come up with that one. And then, of course, I think the big drama from last year was that he was linked with selling the club to LFE Cryptocurrency, the London Football Exchange, who kind of turned out to be a bit of a shady business, kind of a front for, not paying tax and whatever else. And of course, cryptocurrency is a developing market. Not everyone 100% understands it. He did get appointed as a director on the board of LFE during that period, and it was pretty much viewed that they were going to be sold across until LFE owner, and I haven't written his name down anywhere, had an Instagram post trying to address the fans of Perth Glory and how excited he was to be working with them. And then, of course, Twitter and Soccer Twitter doing its thing started to look into his history and criminal convictions that have come up in the business area about him. So I don't think he would have passed a fit and proper person's test for the FFA. But it is kind of started to be a long run of decisions that Tony Sage has made that may not necessarily be in the best interest of the club. What I want to get from you guys is he the right man to continue taking Perth into the future? And if not, who else might be positioned in the West Australian football arena? Will, I'll let you have the first crack at this one, mate. Is Tony Sage the right man to lead the Glory?
Well, honestly, I don't think there's really too many other options around, because Tony Sage has been saying that he has been looking to sell at least a significant stake. But every time, from at least what Tony Sage has said, it's been like a businessman who's wanted to change the colours or the name or something like that. I mean, I'm only going what Tony Sage has said, and we all know he says some crazy things. But yeah, so unless we could get Nick Tanner in or back again, or if we could get someone from overseas, I don't think there's many other options. I suppose you've got Twiggy Forrest. If he decides to give up on the rugby team, maybe he'll get some sense and starts to invest in football. That would be great. But with seeing what he's done with the rugby team in Perth, but honestly, I don't think there's many other options other than Tony Sage. I don't think there's really anyone really stupid enough as Tony Sage is to have lost all that money that he has into Perth Glory.
Yeah, I know, and it's a tough one because it makes it look like I've deliberately said that there's anything wrong with Tony Sage. Like, he deserves a tremendous amount of credit for continuing to bankroll football in Western Australia, and I think there's a lot of investment needed from other business-minded people or other football business people that want to get involved with the club. What was fascinating to me is in the most recent round of A-League expansion bids that included Macarthur, that included Western United, there was a bid that popped up from Fremantle where they put a website together, they prepared a bid, and I just kind of looked at it, I was like, why aren't these guys involved in the Glory? Like, they could definitely probably make a bid to get a percentage or a stake or even a large ownership share of the Glory if they're looking to get involved in football. But I think that's just that difference between what we're seeing now with a lot of the A-League expansion bids is that we'll get an initial team that will put the bid together and secure the license, and then as soon as they've got the license, they'll sell it off. It's what happened with Western United and Birmingham Sports Holding, who own Birmingham City in the UK. It's what happened with Macarthur. Lang Walker got the bid all the way to getting the license and then sold it to two Sydney businessmen. I think that's what we're kind of starting to see, which is a little bit frustrating and a little bit weird. And I guess the big part that you called out, Will, is international ownership as well. We're probably about 50-50 seeing successful international ownership with the likes of, Adelaide United, Melbourne City a little bit closer to me as well, and then really bad international ownership like we're currently seeing with Newcastle, like we've seen in the past with Brisbane Roar. So it is that kind of fine line. I agree with what you're saying in that there isn't really that much else out there to try and bring across to get involved. But same question to yourself, Joe. You've obviously been around and involved with the club for quite a long time. You might remember that Nick Tanya executive consortium that initially brought the team into the A-League. What do you think about Tony Sage, and is he the right man to bring Glory further forward into the future?
I'm not sure if there's anybody else to take over Glory. Like, as you say, like, it's a business. Like, at the end of the day, it's like an investment, and who wants to invest in like a loss-making entity, But no, all credit to Tony. Like, I've interviewed him on the Soccer Podcast, and yeah, he's an awesome bloke, proper businessman. Like, he knows his numbers and figures, everything. But yeah, that's like the big question is like, he's the only person to take us forward because he's the only person at the end of the day, which is a little bit frustrating in a way. But yeah, like who else is there?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I think the fascinating part, and you kind of mentioned it about like, different people wanting to come in and change the colours and whatever else. The bid that he let become public was like the cryptocurrency shady businesswoman guy taking a video in the back of his car, wearing a big fur coat and whatever else. Like if that's the best bid that he's gotten, I would be fascinated to know what some of the other horrific bids that have come through are relating to the Glory and the A-League licence throughout the course of that period, because they must just be absolutely bonkers. But it is a tough one. We need more people involved in football, and like my sincere hope is that the knock-on effect from the 2023 World Cup sees more people wanting to get involved in the sport, in both like the A-League and the W League itself, and we get maybe not necessarily Tony Sage replaced, but more 10% stakeholders, more 15, 20, 30% stakeholders of people that could potentially chip in. There's a lot of money that runs through Perth. We hear about it quite a bit relating to the mining and BHP jumping on board. I guess kind of makes us think, okay, there is visibility from a lot of those big businesses running through Perth, that they do know what Perth Glory is. It had just been Western QBE propping up football for the last kind of 20 years. So that's, I guess, an encouraging position in the right direction. Maybe Gina Reinhart rocks up one day and you guys become the cash money club for the rest of the league. Maybe, like you mentioned, it's Twiggy Forrest or whoever else coming across and changing them to, what would it be, Perth Force or Perth Glory Force or something like that, just combining the two clubs. But yeah, it is a real challenge, and not specifically for Perth, but it's a challenge across the league, trying to get that investment and trying to get the right people involved. The credit I'll give Tony Sage is that Perth they've struggled. They've had, the odd bad off-field year, and we will talk through some of their contracted players and transfers in and what you guys make of that. But they've never really been late on payments. They've never really had massive issues with their coaching department, football people, whatever else. They are relatively stable and relatively well run, and I think Tony Sage deserves a tremendous amount of credit. We won't talk about the salary cap breach. Let's not blame him on that. We'll put that one to one side, and we'll hope that he can take the Glory to the next level and more Champions League appearances, more titles for you guys, premierships, championships, all that sort of great stuff. Jumping back in, though, to our contracted players and transfers in. I'm going to run through this list really quick, guys, and then, again, the same thing. I'm going to get your feedback, your response. First up is contracted players. You've got goalkeepers Liam Reddy and Tando Valafi. Tando Valafi has a little bit of an asterisk next to him. He's still technically on the A-League website, a Perth Glory player, but he's not currently on the Perth Glory website. We'll find out more about that, I'm sure, in the next few weeks. Osama Malik and Dane Ingham, Luke Bodnar and Josh Rowlands, two young defenders who we'll talk about further a little bit with your lineups in a moment. Midfielders Neil Kilkenny and Carlo Armiento. Forwards Chris Economides, Diego Castro, Bruno Fornaroli, Nick D'Agostino and Trent Ostler. Those guys are the contracted in. There are some transfers in. We'll go to those guys in a second. But of those contracted players, the ones that you guys have retained from last season, who do you see as being the most important for the upcoming season? Joe, I'll let you go first.
I think the biggest name there has to be Chris Economides. Obviously, last season missed a vast majority of the season because of his ACL injury. But it'll be awesome to see him back this year, like in the purple, and see how he's recovered. And obviously in that premiership winning season, he was one of our best players, like by a mile. So having him back this season, it's like having a new signing essentially, and especially in an attacking position, which I think like we were lacking like during that COVID period at the tail end of last season. I think Economides, like that, I'm looking forward like to seeing him again.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think he was massively... I think because he's not the biggest name on that list, and because we kind of tend to take the gloss off our Australian players a little bit when it comes to the league itself, and I blame Fox Sports for that, but that's a whole other rant for a whole other podcast week. I don't think he got the rap that he deserved in the premiership winning season. I think he was arguably performed better than the likes of Castro and the bigger names within that side. I think he's effectively, like you've said, a brand new signing. The tough part will be, how's he going to handle ACL injuries? We know players can come back for them. Ryan Grant's done both of his knees and come back and is still an absolute beast of a player. But we have seen players go the other direction where they haven't quite recovered from that. And so much of his game was based on his ability to step past a player and dribble beyond them and get that pace to get away. So hopefully it all goes well and we're talking about him again and gushing about him being like a fringe Socceroo, which he was up until he got injured. But yeah, I think he's a huge one. Same question for yourself, Will. Of those contracted players, who do you think is the big name and the key player for the season ahead?
Yeah, well, I'll definitely be interested to see how Andy Keogh goes as a partnership with Bruno Fornaroli. I think that will definitely be very interesting, because last year we were thinking we were going to see that until eventually he had his tours in India and Saudi Arabia for his what we thought was going to be his retirement tour. But I think, yeah, definitely Economides, Andy Keogh. We'll also be seeing Castro back in the A-League after his camping trip. And yeah, I think those will be quite interesting to see.
So interesting that you brought up Castro, right? Because I'm genuinely curious as to what Perth fans think of him at the moment. So his contract only actually runs, I think, 9 months of the year, and he's under no obligation as part of that contract to do a preseason program. He continues to sign like little extensions here and there for games if there's FFA Cup matches, or for the ACL, I think he signed an extension, or he got a waiver because of the way the season's a little bit skewed in its dates this year. It's very strange to have your club captain and your marquee player who's on, if Football Manager is to be believed, and I should stop using Football Manager as a resource for this stuff, but he's on pretty good wage as far as the A-League and designated players or marquee players are concerned. What are some of your thoughts on him just disappearing with his family and doing like a grey nomad tour up the west coast of Australia? Joe, I'll go to you first. What did you make of the finish to last season, and do you think he's within his rights to kind of take that break with his family?
Yeah, like, obviously as a fan, it was like a bit frustrating to see like we weren't having for finals or like that tail end of like the COVID period. But like at the end of the day, like that was when COVID was like still like a lot more prominent thing, like especially here in Perth as well. So obviously making like the family first decision, like as a fan, like we give him like a free pass to do that. Yeah, like even if that contract scenario, like. We can let it slide because he's such a good player, and like I think we're willing to accept that because we all know how good he is on any given day.
Yeah, I think the fascinating one is that if he's 38 now, is that right? 37, 38?
30, yeah, he's close to 40.
Yeah, he's getting up there. So like he's not going to get better, if that makes sense. His touch is still quality. I think there was a gift throughout the course of the week in the ACL of him just dragging a ball down from 60 feet in the air and stopping it dead on the ground, which is just the stuff that I dream about or think about in the shower as I'm getting ready each morning. But like he's not going to get better. Like he's not going to be that marquee player. He's not going to be that game breaker. And I think one of the things that we struggle to do in the A-League is get those older heads to transition to being, within a cap, or to transition to being a squad player or a mentor to some of the other players. Same question for yourself as well, Will. What do you think about Castro? What do you think the future holds for him? And what do you expect from him this season? Does he kind of owe the Perth Glory fans a little bit for disappearing towards the end of last year?
Yeah, well, I think most of us, we thought when it was initially announced that he wasn't going to be playing at the end of in Sydney last year, I think most of us were pretty accepting of that. We thought, yeah, well, that makes sense. If you've got a young family, you might not want to expose them to that. You might want to stay with your young family. And that made sense. But then it came out a bit later that it was just mainly a contract-based decision to not go to Sydney. So, yeah, I think that was quite frustrating. But, yeah, he definitely does. Well, I wouldn't say that he owes something to the fans, but it would be good for him to make up for that.
Just a casual 15 goals and assists this season. Just, that's all everybody asks. It's not too much from one of your better players and your club captain. We're going to head now to the transfers in. Now, the list isn't that long, but there is some quality in there. The first one joining is Daryl Lockman, a defender who comes across from the Eredivisie in Holland. Jonathan Aspro-Potamidis has returned. He's been at Perth Glory previously. He did have a brief spell with Western Sydney and last year with Western United, but couldn't break into their ageing defensive lineup. Nick Sullivan, midfielder, comes across from Western Sydney. Brandon Wilson had a 1 year kind of, backpacker tour, I guess, of Wellington last season playing for the Phoenix. And you've already mentioned him, Will. Andy Keogh returns. A lot of controversy around Andy Keogh. For those of you that aren't aware, he was previously very much the heart and centre of a salary cap breach where I think it was like his uncle or his wife or something like that, or his auntie got given a car and a job. Yeah, off the books at Perth Glory, which included, like, that was kind of part of his payment package, which, no, we don't ever encourage that stuff. That should never really happen. But he is now a full Australian resident, which means he doesn't count towards the foreign spaces within the league itself. He can, I think, technically be an ACL player, but he might be like a +1 player. I think there's something that comes into it with his previous Irish international caps, but he is a big signing to get back in. Of that list, those 5 players that we've gone through, anyone that stood out to you guys throughout the ACL campaign, anyone that you think might be a breakout star this year, given a bit more of an opportunity in a Perth lineup? Will, I'll let you have the first crack at this one, mate. Who of those 5 names jumps out at you the most?
Yeah, well, I thought Aspro actually performed really well in the ACL compared to what we thought since we'd seen him at Central Coast a couple of years ago and struggle at Western United last year. I think he performed quite admirably. And then you've also got Daryl Lockman. I mean, we'll be hoping that he's just another Greg Ruthridge, but we'll have to see on that one. And Brandon Wilson, I'm not sure how he'll go this year. It's just probably just another mediocre player. I mean, I love Brandon Wilson, but, you know.
Future Botswana international Brandon Wilson, if the recent Reddit threads are to be believed. But same question as well for yourself, Joe. Of those 5, anyone that jumps out at you as potentially being a breakout star for the season ahead?
I don't even know. Like, a lot of these players, like, they're no superstars or anything. Daryl Lockman, although, like, he looks like a beast, like, he's built like a brick shithouse, if I can say that. But his performances in the ACL weren't best. He does seem quite slow, and he hasn't played competitively since 9 months ago, if that. But yeah, as Will said, Jonathan Aspro, he probably one of our standouts, like, in defence during the ACL campaign. And I think the thing that he brings, which is most important, is like a little bit, like, I talked about this on the soccer podcast. It's called grinta. It's like an Italian word for just like getting stuck in or something like that. And there's like one instance during the ACL when he's like gone to head the ball, like, and some other team, I don't know what it was, he's gone to like volley it at the same time, and he's put his head into like this guy's foot and like headed the ball. And like, I think that's what will bring Glory success this year, is that grinta from Jonathan Aspro.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to say grinta meant syllables in Italian, I'd believe that as well, because he's got one of the longest kits in the bloody word. And every time I write it down, I have to, like, in my head, go through how many different syllables I've got to run through. I think, interesting that you mentioned Daryl Lockman. I actually thought he looked all right. I only watched 2 of the 3 Perth Glory games, full disclosure. I didn't think he looked terrible. I think the thing we always forget with these ACL games is that they're playing in the middle of a desert, and also the rest of the divisions around Asia in particular. They're so much faster than the A-League is in that transition. So I can see why you thought he looked slow. I actually thought he looked handy. I don't think he's as good as Wutherick, who's probably replacing. I definitely don't think he's as good as Alex Grant, but I thought he looked tidy. I thought he looked all right. He's got a good pedigree. He played at PSC's Wola, so he's been coached previously by John Van Schip and Michael Van Canis, the old Melbourne City coach and assistant manager. So he's kind of had exposure at that tier of the game, and most of the Dutch defenders that we've brought across directly from that level have done quite well as well. I think like Bar Schenkveld back in the day made the same move from the same 2 clubs. I don't think he'll be at that level, but I think he looked pretty tidy. And then the other big one that I'll call out for you guys is it's always a good sign when other clubs' fans are upset that a player's left, and a lot of Western Sydney people really rated Nick Sullivan. Obviously they didn't have the greatest year last year, but I think quite a few different people said that he was one they wanted to keep hold of and wanted to see more from. So maybe even if it doesn't work out with Brandon Wilson, if he's away on Botswana African Nations Cup duty for like a month of the season or whatever else, maybe Nick Sullivan steps into that role and he gets the chance to be like kind of a breakout player. And then the other one that we haven't spoken about, Carlo Armiento. I think Neil Kilkenny for me, first name on the team sheet every week, but whoever's going to stand alongside him, they've got a big task and some big shoes to fill. But always very interesting. The other part I've asked you guys to do is kind of put your money where your mouth is a little bit and send me through your expected or preferred lineups. Now, full disclosure, of course, we don't ever expect the same team to be out there each and every week. This is purely just a conversation topic. Will, we're going to jump into your one first. I'll run through the lineup and then I'll hand it over to you to kind of talk us through where your head's at and what you think for the team. So you did, Will, to be fair, go with a 4-4-2 lineup, and then I adjusted it to this 4-2-4 to match the same shape that Joe's using and what we've seen from Richard Garcia so far this offseason. But you've gone with Liam Reddy in goal, youngster Josh Rawlins at right back, Dane Ingham at left back, Lockman and Aspro Potamidis as the central defensive partnership, Kilkenny and Wilson at the base of midfield, Economides on the right, Castro on the left, and Keogh and Fornaroli up top. Do you want to talk us through this lineup? Where do you think the key parts of the ground are? Where do you think you're strongest, and where do you think you still need improvement?
Yeah, well, I definitely think we're strongest in obviously the strikers and the wingers. I don't think there is a better attack if you count those wingers as a front 4. I don't think there is a better attack in the competition. But yeah, I think we'll definitely be quite weak in the midfield this year with obviously no one day, and we'll have to have either Brandon Wilson or Nick Fitzgerald alongside Neil Kilkenny. But I chose to put Brandon Wilson alongside Neil Kilkenny, honestly, because I just don't really know that much about Nick Sullivan. And yeah, so then we've got our back line where obviously Aspro, because he was one of the standout defenders, and Daryl Lockman, because obviously of his European pedigree. You've also got Dane Ingham, who had a really standout performances in the Sydney hub last year. And then I put on the right back because there isn't really that much choice. I put Josh Rawlins just because I thought it might be good for Perth Glory to get their own player with a mullet in the right back position, just like to counteract Ryan Grant. I mean, he's a 16-year-old, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes in the A-League season. So, and obviously, Liam Reddy's always going to be our goalkeeper.
Yeah, Liam Reddy needs
that much choice.
Yeah, he needs one clean sheet to take out the all-time clean sheet record for the A-League, which is mind-boggling to me because I think most of my most of my Liam Reddy memories are him like trying to dribble out of his box at random intervals throughout the course of a game. He gives you one a year. He concedes one a year like that, but most of the other weeks he's a very experienced goalkeeper. The only apology that I'll make for you, Will, is that we don't actually have any visibility in this graphic on Rawlins' mullet to kind of get that evidence out there for Perth Glory fans who are looking to try and get guidance on these hairstyles and to see it flying down the right wing this season. But I think a good side. I think the interesting part that you've put together about that front four, and maybe we'll talk about this a moment with Joe's lineup as well, is that when Andy Keogh left, Andy Keogh wasn't he wasn't in the best form, so to speak, and he wasn't quite setting the league on fire, I think, the way you would have expected him to. He has returned under the cap, which is very interesting. I think his willingness to kind of come back and settle again in Perth and bring his family back here is a great sign for the league. One of the things that we probably don't talk enough about is the quality of life. Thomas Sorensen still lives in Australia. He's raising his family here. Ola Toivonen has gone back to Sweden, but he'd previously said he was happy to spend the rest of his career living in Australia. Adelaide has got like Marcelo Carusca, Marco Flores, Casio, a whole list of like South American players still living in and around that area. It's very interesting. I think that Andy Keogh is wanting to come back to Australia and settle permanently, which is good to see. Hopefully he can get back to that original format, but it does give us an interesting segue now into Joe's lineup, where it's pretty much the same structure. We've kept you guys similar because Richard Garcia has effectively been playing this same style and structure, similar to what we've seen with Sydney FC, similar to what we've seen with Wellington Phoenix this season. Couple of big variances though. You've moved Ingham over to the right-hand side, and there was some interpretation that we had to throw in here, Joe, so I've got to get your feedback. At left back, we've got Luke Bodnar, which is the position that he's got in Football Manager and FIFA, but he did play as a left-sided centre-back in the ACL. And then you've gone with Eli Babal to partner Lockman at central defence. One, it's interesting because he hasn't signed for the club, and then two, he's also his playing history would kind of determine that he's a central striker. So maybe talk us through the team, and then maybe we'll go through Babal a little bit further in a minute.
You know who I was thinking of? Like instead of Eli Babal, I was thinking about Tarek. No, I was thinking about the Turkish. He plays in the Turkish league, and he's a Socceroo. I got them mixed up. Nah, not him. Oh, what's his name? What's his name?
Aziz Bayic.
That's him, yeah.
So, yeah, he is a left back, and he was at that Istanbul Basaksehir. I probably butchered that pronunciation. By all means, Turkish fans, trash me in the comment section below. But I think he's gone out on loan, so I don't think he's coming across. But, look, for the hell of it, let's try and reinvent Eli Babal. He's 195 centimetres. He's about 90-odd kilo. He could be a fantastic centre-back. The problem is he's 28 now, and I think he's played like 80 games in the last 10 years, including his time at Melbourne Heart, where I first saw him. So, yeah, out of left field, Joe, I'm not going to lie. Probably the most out of left field we've seen so far, but as far as the A-League's concerned, if he's there trialling, it's not the strangest thing that I've ever seen happen in this league and in this division.
Even before, like, you messaged me, like, are you sure about, like, Eli Babal as centre-back? I was like, oh, yeah, for sure. But, no, it makes sense now.
That was more just me being like, I felt bad for Osama Malik that no one even had him in the conversation. We're talking about a season where you guys are struggling for central defensive depth, and he didn't even make like anyone's squad, which is crazy. So the other variants that you've gone for, obviously Bodnar at left back, coming in for Rawlins instead of the flying mullet, and then you've gone with Nick D'Agostino up top, partnering Bruno Fornaroli. Do you want to talk us through those two changes, Luke Bodnar and D'Agostino?
So Luke Bodnar, like originally Bodnar, I got it mixed up because I thought I had Aziz Bayic as my left back and Bodnar would slot into centre back. Bodnar, like, he's awesome. I've seen him a few times play for MPL as well. I think he was at Bayswater. And then, in the ACL, we just bossed it. And, I think he's ready to make that step up and be a regular season starter for the Glory. And with D'Agostino, Daggers, I was probably the leader of the Keogh out brigade for Glory. I think, in my opinion, he's one of the most frustrating strikers to watch, I think. Just with his, like, hold-up play, and the offsides contributed to that a little bit as well. But I think D'Agostino just adds a lot more dynamic attacking to Glory's front line as well. Like, he's not static like Keogh. He can still head the ball. He can dribble as well. He can shoot. And I think, especially having a young Aussie who's has had experience at Ollie Roo level scoring goals as well. I think he needs to start over Keogh any day of the week.
Yeah, I think he is 23 now, maybe turning 24, because there's that weird extension with the Tokyo Olympics. So you can play up until the age of 24 now for the Olympic tournament. So I think he just sneaks in that way. But like again, you've got to think that for D'Agostino, if he can't really make a berth for a starting role in this Perth Glory side, like he's probably going to have to drop back down to an NPL level to get regular football and then come back that way. I think Bodnar's a good shout. Again, using Football Manager as our background, he does have like 4.5-star potential, so they definitely see something there as far as the West Australian scouts are concerned. It'll be interesting to see how he comes in, and I think the big thing that we all want is we want to see these A-League sides, let's not go and sign like, journeyman players that have played throughout, the Southeast Asian area. Let's really try and give some of these young players a chance, and I think Bodnar's an excellent shout. Ingham moving to right back, how do you feel about him and the depth that you've got at the full-back position this season?
Is Dana right back or a left back? I think he's right.
He's right-footed, but he plays at left back, and he does cut in and shoot quite a bit, and about 1 in 10 goes in, which is a pretty good strike rate, you would think.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think he can. I think he can do the role, and I think it is suited to him. The portion that I would call out is that like we've already kind of talking about playing two relatively young, inexperienced players at the full-back positions. If one of them goes down, I could not tell you who the backup left-back is, and I couldn't. And we know now, obviously, the flying mullet on the right-hand side, thanks to Will. But there isn't really that depth in that wide right position as well. It might be an area in the next few weeks that we see Perth look at a little bit more closely, or maybe they've got something up their sleeve. I think up until last week, and by all means correct me in the comments section below, but I think James Meredith was still a free agent and was potentially looking at re-signing at Perth, and they opted not to, and he's now signed for MacArthur for their inaugural season. How he's fitting in their salary cap, I've got no idea, but that might be a key area that might need to be improved a little bit further. Is there anywhere else for you, Joe, that you think is key and critical? Like, who's the most important player and who's the first name on the team sheet for you here?
I think it has to be Kilkenny, because he's the one who can link the defense to the attack, and without him we just have no strong leader in the midfield. Yes, we have Castro as the captain, but I think really Kilkenny is like the silent leader in the team.
Yeah, I don't know how silent he is. I think he's pretty vocal out there from all the highlights that we've seen. But yeah, I think he's absolute quality.
He's the shadow captain.
Exactly, yeah. I think when I was devastated when he left Melbourne City, because I thought he was fantastic. We played this, I don't know if you remember it, it was Osama Malik as a central as a central defender, and then Neil Kilkenny was a defender as well. But then when we win the ball back, he'd go and run into midfield. It was the weirdest shape, and I think he's probably the only person in the entirety of the A-League that could have made it work. I was a huge rap for him, but obviously it didn't work out with Warren Joyce coming to Melbourne City. But yeah, I think he's absolutely fantastic, and I think he's a player that could still, at 33 now, could still play for another 3-4 years in the A-League. He's got a huge engine on him, which is fantastic to see. We're going to jump back in, though. We're going to go through a couple more items relating to the ins and outs and preview a little bit of the A-League season coming up. So as we jump back in, gentlemen, we're now going to head down to some of the off-field staff, the current manager and assistant. What I wanted to run through with you guys, you got Richard Garcia, first-time manager in the league. There's a few different sides in and around the division this year with first-time managers coming into the league. Stephen McGarry, ex-Scottish Youth International, who's been in and around Perth football for quite a while. Ruben Zadkovic, who retired relatively young, I think 28, 29, and then had a decent career managing in northern New South Wales NPL. And Danny Milosevic, ex-Perth Glory and New Zealand Knights goalkeeper. All four of these people that are going to be running your football program next year have played for Perth Glory at one point or another throughout the course of their careers. First, I'll go to you, Will. What do you think the expectations are for Richard Garcia this year, and what do you think it means to Perth Glory and their support that they've got ex-players now running the show from the managerial standpoint?
Yeah, well, I have to say I was really surprised when we appointed Rich Garcia. I honestly thought that we were going to sign Hayden Fox and continue on with the Popovich style of football, but looks like we've turned a new leaf and we'll be playing Garcia ball now. And I think the expectation is that we should be making finals this year. I think that's definitely what we should be aiming for. Home final is really what we should be aiming for. So I'd say about fourth place is probably around about where we will finish this season. I think Garcia has set his sights on playing some attacking football. We saw it a little bit in the Asian Champions League, but obviously that was a bit quashed by the Asian teams. I'd say home final is really the realistic expectation for this year.
Yeah, I think the fascinating part is that Richard Garcia, perhaps more than most of the other sides that went to the ACL, he definitely called out early, this is a preseason training camp as far as I'm concerned. And he basically treated it like that. Like he had different experimental lineups, tried a few different things, the whole time tried to play a good brand of football, which I think they deserve credit for. The one thing that I will call out is that even the sides that we ran through, they're very top heavy. So thank God he's going out and trying to score 3 or 4 goals. You might win most games 4-3, which is going to do nothing for either of your heart rates, but at least you've got that firepower up top. At least you've got that depth. I think your front four, as you guys have mentioned, is very, very good. And then you've got additional depth in each of those positions, like Armiento coming off the bench as an exciting youngster, like D'Agostino or Keogh jumping on the field for the last 15, 20 minutes. I think there's a lot to be taken from that. And thankfully, I think he's leaning into that as well. Same question for yourself, Joe. What do you think the expectations are for Richard Garcia this season? What do you think it means to have 4 ex-Perth Glory players in the dugout this year?
Firstly, to have like 4 ex-players, I think that brings a lot more heart into the team, and these obviously people who care about the football club, and they're not just there for like a paycheck, essentially. With regard to Garcia, though, at an NPL level, like I've mates who have like around the NPL have played like under the Perth Glory youth system as well, and they're not too confident in him, like to lead like an A-League team. But if the ACL is anything to go by, I think there's definitely some promising signs. However, the expectations surrounding him, like I'd say finals at the bare minimum. But yeah, my expectations aren't too high for Garcia this season. But yeah, if we can play the way that we did in Asia, like over the course of a season, I think there's no reason why we can't finish like top 4. But yeah, I'd say finals would be like the bare minimum for him.
Yeah, I think it's actually, representative of kind of a fascinating trend that we've seen in A-League this season with the off-field appointments. So many new coaches are in the league this season, but all of them are now coming from that playing background. We're in that sweet spot now where we're 16 or going into season 17 of the A-League itself, where we do have quite a few players that had careers in Europe that came back, that played and now have coached for quite a bit. I think Sydney FC kind of set that mould a little bit, maybe even slight credit to Melbourne Victory, even though I can't stand them, but with the way that they introduced Kevin Muscat. Same with Steve Corica. He was a long-time coach. He was a youth team manager, was involved as an assistant in the Sydney FC structure, and then stepped into that role and stepped into that coaching environment. We've seen the same with Patrick Kisnorbo with Melbourne City. He's won, I think he'll be the first coach, if he can win the A-League, to win the W League, the Youth League, and the A-League as a group. So he's done a long stint. Ufuk Talay did a long stint before taking over at Wellington. Warren Moon, foundation player for Brisbane Roar, now managing at Brisbane Roar itself. I think maybe Perth have kind of not followed that trend for the sake of following that trend, but I think more and more clubs are looking to have kind of what you mentioned, Will, to an extent, that immediate plan as to what's our next period, what's our next step, how do we want the team to progress and get better throughout that period. So it might be a long coaching journey. I think all of those coaches I've just mentioned are going to learn lessons this season, and I include Patrick Kisnorbo in that. But what I want to see and what we'd hope for the league is that they take that long-term approach with it, and we aren't talking about Perth needing a replacement manager in round 5. Either stick with this and do it for a year, do it for the 2 years of the contract, and then reevaluate how the cycle's going. But you've really got to make sure that you're putting those long-term structures in place. That's where we need to improve quite a bit. The other fascinating portion, and I think you guys have kind of contradicted each other a little bit in your placement and expectations for the season. We'll talk about that more, but there are a lot of questions around a lot of the different sides in the A-League itself. We've got, I think, a gap between sort of the bottom 4 sides. Apologies to fans because some of those previews we haven't done just yet. But, we know there are certain sides that are going to struggle based on the strength of their playing rosters and the fact that they don't have coaches available at the moment. They don't have marquee players, all that sort of stuff. But then there's a lot of teams kind of really, I think, from maybe even 3rd position down to like 7th or 8th, where it just depends how they settle this season and it depends what they get right. I think Adelaide United's in that group. I think Western Sydney Wanderers, depending how quickly Carl Robinson lands and balances, in that group as well. And I think Perth Glory is absolutely in that group. If they hit the ground running and get everything right from the start, then they're going to do fantastically well. I think the other thing as well is having that ACL campaign, having to go into a tournament environment and a 2-week training camp period, which no other clubs had due to travel restrictions at the moment, is huge for them. They could potentially be on another level to most of the other sides in the division. What kills it a little bit is that they've now got to wait a month to play their first game on the 16th. So somehow with that fixturing, it hasn't quite worked out to support them. But we'll talk a little bit more about our season predictions in a moment as well. The active support, gentlemen, we mentioned briefly the shed. It is one of the iconic images in the A-League, and one of the most iconic sound bites is goalkeepers taking a goal kick and the chant that follows that one. Will, I'll go to yourself here. If you've got someone that's listening in, either if they're a Perth fan or they might just live in Perth and have never really followed the A-League, A-League. What sort of membership pitch would you give them to try and get them down to see a game and potentially to join up and sign on as a member for the upcoming season?
Well, honestly, I'd say, I know the tickets are really expensive, but just go to a game and you probably will be hooked if you stand around that northern end, I think it is, where the shed is. Because honestly, I don't think there's any atmosphere in West Australian sport that is like going to a Perth Glory game and sitting around that end of the stadium. Yeah, I don't think there's anything better than that, to be honest.
Oh, look, I'd 100% advocate for that. I think the best thing that football has to offer, and it's not just Perth specific, it's like the A-League viewing experience is unlike the AFL. It's unlike the NRL. It's unlike any of the other sports that we've got. And just getting people in the door is the hardest part that we've got at the moment, trying to get them down. Same question for yourself, Joe. If you had a friend that was on the fence that hadn't been to a game before, what sort of pitch would you give them to get them through the doors at a Perth Glory game? And how would you try and pitch them to become a member for the upcoming season?
Like, I've tried doing this like with my mates as well. That like they'll watch their EPL, but they're not too like they haven't really paid interest in the A-League. But it's the atmosphere. Like that's the one thing you can't get from watching like Everton versus Chelsea on the telly. You can watch on telly, that's one thing, but going to a game and getting a beer, like you're sweltering in a 40-degree sun, and you got the shed there. It's all those like small things, intangibles, which are just so like it's hard to describe, but it's the best thing about going to a football game, especially in Perth, like with the shed as well. That's such a big draw card, which I think can attract all these like EPL fans to come down to a Glory game, because that's probably like the most English like Brexit active support that there is in the league. And I think like if you just love like all that shithousery type of football, like all your silly chants and all that, you need to come down to the Glory, especially sit like near the shed or go in the shed or whatever, because you're not going to get that experience anywhere else like in the A-League.
Yeah, I'm going to ignore the segue that you just handed me, which was 45 minutes about Brexit. We're going to leave that one out for another week, I think. We'll come back on the podcast. Maybe we'll do a soccer podcast episode crossover with that one, and we'll see if we can cover all that off. But yeah, I think you both hit the nail on the head. Like, the experience is unlike any other in the division. You're going to get exposure to, like a global game as well. I think one of the tough parts as well that we always kind of talk about, or the comparison that we always get, is it's tough not to measure the A-League against the success of other teams over in Europe and the size and strength of their playing groups. The thing at the moment is no one's playing in front of fans. The UK has got empty stadiums just like the A-League does. So if we can get round one people down there to watch our matches, and we can get consistent crowds throughout what is going to be the most competitive, I think, media market that the A-League's ever had, playing at the same time as the AFL and NRL and during their pre-seasons, then that's half the battle already won. And hopefully we can ride the momentum of the upcoming World Cup as well to try and get more people interested in the game from a state government sponsorship level, from a business sponsorship level. We've spoken about BHP briefly. What I will try and get both of your input on, because I'm fascinated by getting each of your opinions, and this one isn't on the run sheet, so apologies for springing it on you. What do you think a second Perth team might offer? We spoke about that Fremantle bid from the most recent thing. We have seen also Football Western Australia or Football WA previously signal an interest in running a different side, the Swans. It's come up a few different times over the last 10 years or so. We have seen certain sides galvanised, membership bases growing in cities when a second team is added, either galvanising the existing structure or adding a second team to create that natural rivalry. How do you think a second team in Perth might benefit it, or do you worry it would cannibalise Perth Glory too much? Joe, I'll let you have a crack at this one first time.
Well, it depends on the market in Perth, because like average game, like a good season for Glory, the average attendance would be around 12,000. So there is that cannibalism aspect, like especially in Perth. But I think like if they go like into like the northern suburbs, which is like Joondalup, which is like 30 k's out of Perth, that has a massive English like residence there. I think a team there would be perfect. Or you go all the way south to Fremantle, there's lots of Italians there. I think that could work. Whether it will cannibalise Glory, I think it will a little bit, because Glory has been the sole team in WA since 1995, which is 25 years odd. So I think it'll be hard to start up a new team. But like from my perspective as well, like I want to see like a WA derby. Like we have like the distance derby with Wellington Phoenix, but like everyone knows it's not a derby. It's like a social media derby for like the A-League and Glory to get likes on Facebook pretty much. But like I'm for it. If it sees the Glory attendance go down, so be it. I just want to see a derby in WA.
So I can talk to my experience being the shit team in a division because I was a Melbourne Heart Foundation member back in the day, and all we had every season was the derbies to look forward to because we would be shit all year and we'd lose 15 games in a row, but then we'd win that one derby around Christmas and it would be the best thing for our entire season. It would justify the entire year. And I think that's what Perth's success and Perth's on-field statistics are very much if they're winning or not. But if you add that extra element, like a real derby atmosphere and bragging rights in a city, we see it in the AFL. Unfortunately, I hate to use that comparison. I hate comparing it with other sports, but that is still arguably as big as the grand final in Western Australia and the sporting landscape. The same thing would happen. We have seen, I think it's Bayswater City and Perth Soccer Club also signal interest. They're member clubs for the National Second Division. So maybe a second Perth team comes that way. ECU Joondalup, fantastic record of producing Socceroos talent and fantastic young footballers in and around the A-League itself. Unfortunately, because they're a university affiliation, the university's got no interest. But obviously, there's a massive market up in that Joondalup area. I think even also going further south into Rockingham and all those sort of areas, Kwinana even to an extent, is a massive growth area for Western Australia as well. So maybe we do see that and start to think of like a north and a south rivalry, given the different sides of the river as well there. Will, what about for yourself? Any exposure or understanding of the National Second Division or expansion into that Perth area, and what do you think it'd bring to Perth football?
Yeah, well, with the two NPL teams, Perth and Bayswater, I think those two teams would definitely be cannibalising on Perth's support base, really, because both of those two teams are quite inner city, and that would just be like if you had Perth SC versus Perth Glory in the derby. That realistically, that'd just be another Melbourne Heart, Melbourne victory. And apologies to you, but I don't think really the A-League wants another Melbourne Heart, unfortunately for you guys. But
no, I mean we could fill another podcast on this one, mate. But let's be honest. I don't think I'm in Melbourne, and I don't think we needed additional Melbourne and Sydney teams, but we got them anyway, and now we've got to deal with that scenario. But I think the interesting part that you just brought up is Perth Soccer Club as well. If they join it and they take all the grinta or whatever the word was that you mentioned earlier, Joe, into the division, that'll be a tough question for a lot of that Italian community as to who they go down and support in a particular year and a particular season. But it is good now that we're having that dual conversation. We're not just talking about A-League and W League expansion. We're talking about a whole national second division and providing a tier either via a national playoff or via a full second national division that encompasses the entirety of the country as another way to try and get more football representation in Perth. It is well played. It is well represented from a weekend like capacity and the amount of players playing the game. The challenge is how do we take all of those European-based people and trying to get them incentivized to go and watch the A-League. And I think things like local derbies or north-south derbies and stuff like that can help quite a bit. Round one fixtures, you guys have the benefit of knowing who your fixture is going to be. The last couple of these that we've done, the fixtures weren't out yet. Thankfully, they were released a couple of weeks ago. Saturday, the 16th of January, 2021 versus Adelaide United at home. You do have a big gap between now and then. We'll talk about now your season predictions and expectations. I know we've mentioned it briefly already talking about Richard Garcia and his pass mark, but where do you guys predict that Perth will finish, and what do you think the key is to them getting that spot? Joe, I'll let you have the first crack at this one if you like.
I think maybe 5th or 6th. Just on the basis that there's the competition doesn't look too strong this season. If Glory had this same squad last season, I would say out of finals, but purely because we've seen a decrease in the players that have gone to India and the strength of each team. Obviously Sydney will be up there again, but yeah, considering how many good players Glory have lost, I think finals 5th or 6th, maybe 7th, definitely in that mid pack. Along with probably Adelaide, Brisbane as well, Western Sydney.
Yeah, I think separating, I already mentioned it, but quite a few of those sides in that middle pack, just separating themselves from the rest, that's going to be the big challenge for them. I think a big thing as well is if you guys can turn NIB into a bit of a fortress again, and it becomes the place where you guys are pretty much not guaranteed 3 points, but teams know it's going to be a huge challenge to try and go there and get something. That'll be a huge part for your season also. Will, same question for yourself, season prediction. Where do you think we should see the Glory at the end of the year?
Yeah, I'm a bit more optimistic than Joe. I've seen all the other teams, they have really weakened quite a lot since last season. I'd say 4th would probably be, 4th will probably be where we finish. But realistically, with what's happened in the last year or so, I'd say 6th would pass. And I'd say if we finished lower, then that's definitely a failure. But yeah, 4th, I think, is what we've seen in the ACL, I think it will be achieved.
So, follow-up question for you. Who do you think are the 3 teams that might be further ahead of you as far as the end of the season is concerned?
I'd say Sydney, Melbourne City and Western United.
Oh, yeah, good one. I always forget about Western United. The other one that is coming up for me at the moment is that I think City and Sydney have got very similar lineups to what they had last season. They haven't lost a tremendous amount, which I think is why I think they'll be up towards the top 2 again. But then the other one, I think every time I look at MacArthur's squad and they keep just adding players like James Meredith, who they didn't need but have now got, I think they've got a very strong lineup. If they click quite early, I think they'll be a challenge. And Western United, look, they're all 37, 38. They're eventually going to run out of legs, and I don't think Mark Radan's going to play any young kids this season, so I'm not as scared about them. I don't think Victory will have 2 bad years in a row, just because I'm never that fortunate in my supportership. And Western Sydney, obviously, Carl Robinson, he kind of knows what he's doing a little bit, so they're going to be steering the ship a little bit straighter this season as well. But I think Perth have the tools. I think, as you guys have already alluded to, I think Perth have a very, very good front line, as good as any in the division, but that's dependent on, 1, them all clicking, and 2, them all kind of, playing at top form and playing well together on the pitch at the same time. It'll be very interesting to see. But, of course, we want a successful Perth Glory in the league. It's better for the division. It's better for our representation around Australia, which we want represented as well. It does bring us to the end, though, gentlemen. I want to thank you both so much for joining us and talking through all things Perth Glory. We probably could have gone for another hour and a half if we had to let ourselves on certain topics. Will, if people want to find more of your content, where's the best place to find you?
I'd say the best place to find me would probably be on Twitter and Instagram. It'd be at Glorious World. That's a Y instead of an I. That's normally how glorious is spelled, but yeah, just for that bit of a pun there. So Glorious World with a Y.
And of course on the reserveteam.com.au, mate, you've got to get the plug in. Otherwise, our unpaid internships won't get renewed again for next season. So that's fine. And Joe, of course, you do fantastic work over on the Soccer Podcast. If people want to check out more of your content, where's the best place to find you?
Yep, so we're on every good Spotify, or every good podcast platform, including Spotify, Apple, Google, all those things. We also have shows on YouTube as well, which we do film. And yeah, just Soccer Podcast, SOKKAH.
Perfect. And there will be links in the description to the Glorious World, to Will's personal Twitter account, to the Soccer Podcast, Twitter pages and YouTube pages and all that sort of great stuff. And of course, if you want to get all your news Australian, New Zealand football, go and check out the reserveteam.com.au. Links will also be in the description below. But really, more than anything, we just appreciate you guys watching along with us. If we've gotten anything massively wrong, if our hot takes are too hot or too cold, let us know in the comment section below or hit us up on Twitter. If you want to support the channel that little bit more, you can drop a like on this video. It gets us higher in YouTube search results when people look for Australian, New Zealand football content. You can subscribe to the channel to be kept up to date on all of our season previews if your team's coming up in the next few weeks and as we continue to build towards the start of the A-League and W-League seasons. But as always, I've been Shaun, from myself, from Will, from Joe, from everybody at the reserveteam.com.au. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next time.